talk about whole grains today. We're going to talk about carbohydrates in general, whole grains more specifically. And I think we've talked about this at length during the course of the rest of our classes. So your first page here, choose good carbs, not no carbs. And this is something that, how many of you guys have heard of like this no carb diet or a really low carbohydrate diet? Anybody heard of that? Low carbs and carbs are bad and don't eat carbohydrates and that kind of thing. Well, carbohydrates are absolutely crucial to your health. We as humans use almost exclusively carbohydrates as a source of energy for our brain. It's a source of energy that keeps us functioning in the immediate sense. It also maintains your blood sugar and lifts it up quickly when we need more blood sugar to give us that energy for immediate action. So it's not really possible to function healthily without carbohydrates. The idea is that when we include carbohydrates, which we have to in our diet, that we make the choices that are best for us. And we've talked over the past 10 weeks about whole grains, but we've also talked really, really heavily about another source or another two sources of carbohydrates. Can anybody tell me what those two sources might be? Besides whole grains. What are they? Fruits and vegetables. So these are in my view, would be my first choice of carbohydrate, simply because they have so many of the nutrients that we need. They have fiber. They have vitamins that are water soluble, all of the stress vitamins, the B vitamins, vitamin A, C, vitamin E. They also provide us with phytonutrients that are anti-inflammatory, anti-cancer, anti-aging. So they're all really critical. So my idea would be, and look at your plate. Your source of carbohydrates on that plate are fruits, vegetables, and grains. And which side has the larger portion? Fruits and vegetables. A smaller portion of grains, and we want those to be mostly whole grains, and we'll talk a little bit more in review about that. And then that other portion, which is going to contain protein and hopefully small amounts of saturated fat from an animal source, perhaps. The whole idea of no carbs is one of those things where you can't eliminate an entire food group or an entire macronutrient from your diet. You have to have protein, you have to have carbohydrates, you have to have fat. They are crucial for your body to work properly. What you want to do is make the best choices within those groups. So we knew about proteins. What were our best sources of protein? Chicken, meats, fish, eggs. What? Beans. What else? Eggs, fish, chicken, other meats. There's one thing missing, my favorite, Lisa favorite. Nuts. Nuts and seeds, exactly. Okay, so got to have those. Those are all good choices when you choose lean meats. Even better if you're choosing free-range, grass-fed type meats. And then we talked about fruits and vegetables. What are the best sources of fruits and vegetables? So we want the fresh stuff first. Frozen stuff second. And if you're eating out of season, then your best choice first is frozen. So if I'm eating asparagus in December, it's out of season. So buy the frozen. Don't buy the expensive stuff that came from Peru or someplace where it's summer on the other end of the earth. And now we talk about our best carbohydrate sources, and we just look at the plate, that's the answer. Half fruits and vegetables, a smaller portion of grains. So in my mind, I would say go for the fruits and vegetables, get your carbohydrate sources from there. Second best choice would be your whole grains. The less processed, the better. What would be an example of an unprocessed grain? Unprocessed, meaning not cooked either. What's one? You got to cook it though. The only one that I can think of, and we don't eat it this way very often, is corn. But for the most part, every other grain source is processed at least once by cooking. There's not very many grains that you can eat that are raw. So we're already moving out of a whole food and into a processed food. But any fruit, any vegetable can be eaten raw. So it's really the only whole food choice of carbohydrate. You would have to cook most grains. Corn you can eat raw, but we just don't do that very often. We eat it, if you eat it really lightly steamed. So the best sources, your first choice, fruits and vegetables, and then second choice, a singly processed grain, which would be like a brown rice, or wild rice, whole oats, some whole grain that's not processed. So the easily digested refined carbohydrates. And these are the ones that are really highly refined, which would be white bread, white rice, pastries. We know about sugared sodas. All of these things, and especially when you see the word enriched when it comes to a flour product. Why do they need to enrich it? They put vitamins in it. Why? Because they took them out in the process. Okay, there's a little picture down here on the bottom. This is a grain, and this could be a grain of corn, a grain of rice, a grain of oats, of wheat, rye, barley. All of those things have these three parts. They have what's called the bran, which is the jacket that's on the outside, the endosperm on the inside, and the germ. And when something is processed, the bran and the germ are removed. One, because the bran is a hard husk on the outside and you can't really use it to cook things, which is why brown rice takes so long. You got to cook it longer because you got to get through that bran outside. And the germ, which has some fat in it, which spoils if it sits on the shelf. But that endosperm, the white part, that's the starch. That's what we eat when we eat a white bread, any kind of pastry made with white flour. And all of the vitamins and minerals that are so cool about grains are taken away in this process. So they put them back after they're done. They take out phytochemicals, they take out all the good stuff, and then they try to put it back with vitamins that have been manufactured in a laboratory. Here are the whole grains, some of the better sources: oatmeal, brown rice, 100% whole grain bread. But remember, we're already into a pretty big process there. We're into grinding and cooking. There's two processes in whole grain bread. Same with pita pockets, and pasta, the same. They're better choices than the white flour, but they're still two processes away from whole foods. And quinoa, an excellent whole grain. It's only got one process. It's a very short, lower heat process, so it's got a lot of fiber in it, and it's a great protein source. There are components in grains that make them difficult to digest that soaking removes. So the leptins, which we don't have to talk about it anyway, they're a lot of times they're called anti-nutrients, but they're the parts of plants that make them difficult to digest, or they make them not absorbable in terms of minerals. Those things are taken away when you soak them. Brown rice is one of a better example. Brown rice, oats, any of those grains that have that hard shell on the outside will be, and then they're less time to cook. The same thing goes with beans. Beans are really much healthier for you than the minerals and all of the nutrients, much more accessible when you can soak them.
And they cook a lot faster.
They cook way faster, yes ma'am. So across the board, a whole grain after soaking would cook much faster, and at lower heat as well. You don't have to boil the heck out of it. You can just kind of simmer it, and it'll cook really nicely. I have 5 quick tips for adding good carbohydrates to your diet. You can start your day with whole grains. The steel-cut oats, remember we talked about oats and how processed they are? These quick oats are almost flour, which is why they cook so quickly. So if you go back up the ways, a whole oat is like a grain of rice with the jacket on. So if they cut that in half, And you have that instead. You've got both the bran and you've got less processing in terms of what kind it is. Remember we talked about how to cook it if you put it on at night? If you want 2 cups of oatmeal, which would be 4 servings, you have 2 cups of water and a cup of oatmeal. Put it in the pot, bring it to a boil, turn it off, put the top on, and go to bed. In the morning, when you come back, that oatmeal is cooked, it's al dente, it's beautifully cooked. All you have to do is take your portion, put it in a bowl, heat it up somehow. If you use a microwave, or you can heat up a separate portion for breakfast and put your nuts in it and, you know, milk, however you like to prepare it. And it's really, really nice and really filling. Again, whole grains, if you're going to have a sandwich like you were talking about eating here, you have your sandwiches, you choose whole grain breads. Look for bread that lists the first ingredients with that word whole. We've talked about this several times. If it doesn't say whole wheat and it just says wheat flour or enriched flour, it is not whole wheat. It has to use the word whole or it's not whole. A lot of times you'll see made with whole grains, and then you flip it over and you look at that label. Remember how we talked about the most predominant source is the first on the list. And it'll say whole wheat flour, and then all the rest of the flour is a processed flour. So it's got some whole grain, but not all. So the 100% would be your better choice. Bag the potatoes. Instead, try brown rice, bulgur, wheat berries, whole wheat, or another whole grain. Even better, try something really healthy, like a sweet potato, a yam, or a turnip. You know, you can cook turnips. Does anybody know what a turnip is anymore? But if you get a turnip, you can peel it or not, just wash it really well. Cook it like you would boil potatoes for mashed potatoes. Mash those up. You can put a little bit of olive oil with it, some salt and pepper, however you like to do your mashed potatoes, and serve it as a mashed potato. It's really, really good. You can do cauliflower the same way if you have a food processor. But any of those root vegetables can be substituted for potatoes. They're lower in starch, better choice carbohydrates. Remember how many oranges it takes to make a serving of orange juice? Like 4 to 5? It'd be better if you just ate the orange. You get more of the nutrients, less sugar, and more fiber. This is the second page, carbohydrate-containing foods. These are your grains and starches and starchy vegetables. Dairy also has carbohydrates, so remember that when you're eating it. Remember that dairy, especially milk, has its own sugar. It's called lactose. It also has protein, and then if it's not a non-fat, it has some fat in it. But here, your fruit and non-starchy vegetables all have carbohydrates, and they're really good sources because they have a lot of other things with them, not just the sugar. I also wanted to leave you with some ideas for low sugar drinks, but I wanted to remind you there are 2 things going on when we talk about drinking. One of them is hydration, and the other one is doing something else besides sodas. So remember that anything with caffeine is not going to hydrate you. So even though I put on here coffee, black or green teas, those do have caffeine. So if you're drinking that all day long and you're like, well, Lisa said, you know, instead of drinking sodas, remember that you're also dehydrating yourself at the same time. So alternate your tea or coffee with more water. I got a sparkling water with a splash of juice. We've talked about that as well. These coolers, look at the portion sizes on that recipe. 1/3 of a cup of melon, 3/4. I mean, this is not a whole bunch of fruit. So don't go crazy with, you know, like a whole banana, half an apple, you know, half of an orange, a big old handful of nuts and berries, and before you know it, you've got 500-calorie smoothie. So, like, look at the portions that are going on here. What is the only source of fiber in our diets? Vegetables and fruit and, whole grains and nuts. What are all those things? They're plants. The only place we can get fiber in our diets is plants. Very nice. Well, so I'm going to miss you guys. Good luck to you.